Hi, everyone. Welcome to PRJ. So happy to see you all. Committee for Racial Justice was started, well, see, you guys should let me do this. Over 11 years ago, because of a racial incident that happened at Santa Monica High School involving a young Black male and the wrestling team. They chained him to a locker and put a sign on him that said slave for sale. Anyway, long story short, that's how we here today. That's what we do in this community. We support the African American community and all of the injustices, as well as celebrate the triumphs and everything great that happens in our city. And so we do these workshops monthly, which most of you know. We have great speakers all the time. Every time I'm just almost positive this room should be packed with people because they just don't even understand the caliber of the speakers that we go, in depth to find and to bring to our events. And they don't get paid. We just bring them out and they are wanting to talk to the community. So if anybody's listening online, you know somebody that you can tell to come on in person or online, please do so. We're gonna have our speakers and then we're gonna have a Q&A afterwards. We have wonderful, we're back, guys, to our potluck. So if you're coming on down, probably don't have to bring much today, but because we have lots of food. But every time we have a workshop, you can bring something to share with everyone. And for those in person, the restaurant's out the door. The restaurant is out the door to the left. Okay. So Joanne?
Yeah?
Are we about to introduce our first speaker?
Oh, sure.
Did I introduce myself? I said I'm Robbie Jones. I've been living in this community all of my life. I was born and raised right around the corner by my grandmother, and I'm just proud to be here with y'all today. Thank you.
Okay, we were supposed to have 3 speakers today, but I got a text that there was an emergency with James Coomes, so he won't probably be with us. He wasn't sure he could make it, and I think he's not going to make it. But we have 2 wonderful speakers with us still. And as you know, the topic is around mental health. This is Mental Health Awareness Month. And the first speaker is going to be Pastor Albert Starr. And this is a man who has done many things in his life. And I'm not going to read the whole list, but I'm going to give you a little sense of it here. In terms of locally with LA and Santa Monica, he served as pastor of Ascension Lutheran Church in the Crenshaw district of Los Angeles from 1982 to 2009. And then another highlight is that he served as director for the church-wide Evangelical Lutheran California Ethnic Specific Multicultural Ministries and Racial Justice Team from 2015 to 2021. And as a pastor teacher, he takes great delight and special joy in helping to lift up and engage the gifts and talents of people of African descent and others, celebrating their capacity for building a better world. And he's also a world traveler. He's been, I can't list all the places here, but I'll just give you a sense. He's been to Namibia, Thailand, Malaysia, the former Soviet Union. So he's a very wise person, in my opinion. He spoke at Church in Ocean Park, and I said, we have to bring him to see our day. People have to hear this now. So, most recently, he served as interim pastor at, Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica. So, Reverend Starr.
Thank you to everybody here and those who are online. This is a great opportunity to be with you this afternoon. We are at the crossroads or the intersection of mental health and the challenges that come with living together with realities of race and racism and all of those things that accompany that. I do have a PowerPoint. Let's see, Louise, I don't know if you're controlling that or not, but there's a West African theology or philosophy by the word, the phrase Sankofa. And Sankofa really focuses in on reaching back and taking hold of the past in such a way that the past becomes nourishment and encouragement for moving into the future, taking hold of our future in a helpful way. One of my teachers in undergrad, Yvonne Gillespie, was a philosopher and poet and songwriter and musician, traveled the world doing what he loved. And one of the things that he loved was creating space for community, creating space. And a very real part of mental health is experiencing the space, the room where we can really be our authentic selves, who we really and truly are, where we can tell our stories, where we can share what both our triumphs, our victories, as well as those things that bring us heartache and sorrow, the things that we wrestle with, the things that we struggle with. We can do that without having to be afraid or having to feel put upon. But Gillespie used to start his class by welcoming everybody into the room. He'd take off his shoes and he would lead us in a song that said, "All things go too fast, quickly pass us by. Only love it is that with us stays, abides with us. To be selfless, we must try. All things go too fast, quickly pass us by. Only love it is that with us stays, abides with us. To be selfless, we must try." I don't know what soundtrack you have that accompanies you as you go about, but anybody here got a favorite song that always kind of comes to mind? You just kind of hit play when you need it the most, when you need to know something, when you need something reassuring, something that's encouraging, comforting, or something that helps you to navigate the difficult times and the difficult places. Every culture on this planet Earth, all human beings, who live in community, experience that. The need for having something to help you navigate the times. I don't know what your song might be, but this is one of mine. And so when we talk about keeping it real, we have to talk about the things that work for us, the things that help us, as well as being able to keep it real and really free to talk about the things that hurt us. When we go to the doctor, one of the things that if the doctors worth their weight in gold or weight in salt, worth their salt, they're going to ask the question, where does it hurt? Where does it hurt? How does it hurt? And sometimes that gets to be a little fuzzy for us when we begin to talk about our mental health. We're quickly to talk about the physical dynamics, but sometimes not quite as quick in terms of our mental stuff. So keeping it real. One of the things about keeping it real is that no healing comes to wounds that are left unattended or unacknowledged. Unacknowledged or unattended. If we don't recognize not only our own wounds and woundedness, but those of others as well, then they will often go attended. They will be left uncared for. A Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu, said, do you have, or raised the question, do you have the patience Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles? You got some idea right away about what our mud is, you know, things, how is it? It's clear as mud. That means confusion. No matter what source of the confusion, that's not the issue. But the question becomes, can you wait to have the patience till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the action arises by itself? What really needs to happen arises by itself. Sometimes in our crashing about, because because things, it's not clear which way to go, what to do, how to cope with what's pressing us the most. Sometimes in the absence of clarity, we start to thrash out. And that can be so unsettling to us. One of the things that, again, is, and can we go to the next page? One of the things that's tremendously necessary for us as we talk about keeping it real is a need for breaking cycles and patterns of behavior, not just for us as individuals, but as society, as systems and structures, programs and policies and practices that can keep us bound up and instead of bringing the kind of freedom and freshness, instead of bringing liberation, can continue to keep us tied up, tangled up. And so breaking cycles, particularly breaking cycles of silence and shame. Those two in particular, those two dynamics in particular, silence. The things either we can't talk about or it's not popular to talk about it, or the things that we just, we don't want, because it's difficult sometimes. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to engage that. Two barriers in particular are that get in the way of our wholeness, personally and individually, as well as collectively. Barriers particularly that are rooted in white supremacy and anti-Blackness. So we live in a culture where philosophies and about exceptionalism. You've got to be exceptional in order to be accepted. Personal superiority is built on race, class, or sexism or ableism. And that we live in a world, all this talk now about AI, everything, even more so, we're expecting responses to be instantaneous, quick, fast, in a hurry. Am I right about it? We're not right. If it's not almost instantaneous, then the levels of frustration go up really quickly. But remember now to question: can we wait for the mud to settle? No matter what that mud that's muddying up things, no matter what it is, for the water to clear. Can we think about that in the context of our mental health, our relationships one to another, and how intricately we are connected one to another? We've got to recognize our own capacity, as well as society and systems and structures and programs that sometimes we depend on or that we look to, that ought to have in some way of helping us experience some sense of liberation and freedom. But instead, sometimes, because we can't always talk about what we really need to talk about. Sometimes we're afraid to talk about things. Sometimes we avoid the things because they are difficult. But if this theme of keeping it real is going to be helpful to us, then we've got to talk about some real truth. That this reality of racism doesn't go away. Yes, race is a social construct. It's something that has just been developed or made up, if you will. But it does have some very real dynamics, that impact us. I saw this picture in the DuSable Museum in Chicago. And I was struck by it because of this little girl. The photographer, by the name of Flip Skolke, he took this picture in 1963. And by my estimation, this little girl in 1963 must have been maybe about 4 or 5, maybe. And so now, by now, if she's still alive and grew up, matured, she may be in her late 60s, early 70s now. My question for her, about her, is what happened to her? We see at a young age that she's being engaged in something that is just iconic when it comes to the stuff that divides us, the kind of stuff that imposes upon us the brutality of a history of racism, as well as the realities of what's going on right now in terms of white supremacy and anti-Blackness. But that mentality and that philosophy that supports organizations, if you will, or culture like the Ku Klux Klan, it creates unsustainable illusions of superiority that infect systems and structures that are programmatically responsible for contributing to our collective health or absence of health as a society. Wholeness and health depends on all of us being liberated and free. Free from the impositions of ideologies that would foster the notion that some are superior and others inferior. That's an illusion, and that's a lie. And any of us who are living with trying to maintain or support illusions and lies, we struggle and we wrestle, we suffer, we hurt. We don't get to live to the fullest capacity of who we are as created as human beings. The writer and theologian Bell Hooks asks us to consider the possibility that to love Blackness is dangerous in a white supremacist culture or society, because it threatens that society. It threatens that culture in such a way that the fearfulness causes us then to try to perpetuate and hold up a system that is built on false notions, lies that are detrimental to all of our health. And so I'm not just concerned about my children or my granddaughter, who's not much older now than that little girl was in 1963. If we're going to be a healthy society together and really know the truth that we are stronger together than we will ever be apart, then we've got to be concerned and care about all of our children. We've got to raise some questions. What happened to her as she grew up? Especially what happened to her as she either lived out that kind of influence, or was she able to break free from it? Some questions that we have to avoid, have to listen to. The truth of the matter is that often we avoid what is dangerous. And this stuff is dangerous. It's dangerous to our well-being. And sometimes what is dangerous to us, or where we've been hurt, or what we're afraid of, we avoid. Is that right? Or is that just me? Yeah. Well, isn't it true that in our experience in abusive relationships, and racism is abuse, in abusive relationships, how often is the dynamic imposed upon the one who is on the receiving end of that abuse? Be quiet. Don't talk. Don't tell. The freedom to speak out, the freedom to tell our story, to tell our truth, the freedom to even to feel good about ourselves is taken away. And those dynamics continue to echo. A couple of years ago, and Joanne mentioned that I served as interim pastor at Mount Olive Lutheran Church here in Santa Monica. I met a man, simply, everybody called him Wally. He was at that time celebrating about his 90th birthday when I first met him. We had in common that we were born in Virginia. We were both born in Virginia. I'm not 90. I'm working on it though. But Wally, over the course of the 8 months or so that I got to know him, he began to tell me stories of his life. And within 8 months, he died after our short meetings. But one of the stories that he told me inspired me to write this poem. I call it The Elder's Lament. His face honey brown and barely wrinkled by the journey of his 90 years, now furrowed and etched as his voice. He spoke of the aged and rancid cup of sorrow and fear he'd long been drinking from, and now in these late years had taken to sipping with a chaser of some late-breaking brew on tap, a bottled version of an old and vintage recipe. Same old news, why even call it news? It's an old and haunting elixir, resurrecting again and again. There is precious little room left for kneeling, it seems. Little room left even in the sanctuary of prayer. Many and more are the minds so gripped by the hard labor of grief. The suffocating fragrance of sorrow hangs so very thick in the air. Who can breathe and not taste the bitter? Who can remain unflinching when the weeping waves come crashing in, unwanted, unexpected, in past the breakwaters and safe harbor, crumbled by the pounding and chaotic menacing winds of a cognitive dissonance so cruel as to treat the very sanctum of sanity itself of no account. His posture erect, sitting up straighter now, he recounts wonderings of his childhood mind. He spoke his remembering of standing hand in hand with his mother on the sidewalks of Richmond. Richmond, crown of the Confederacy, still ripe with seditious zeal for the old Dominion. Richmond, hail protector king, crowned, called, and committed to protect. Protect who? Protect and serve who? In his childhood mind's wondering, ashamed at 90 to confess, but I was a child, just a child, just a black boy child wondering, is it sweeter? Maybe sweeter like honey sweeter. Surely it must be sweeter. And I just wanted to taste it, that water from that fountain. That water from that fountain, that water from that fountain under that sign, that for whites only sign. Something sacred breaks to hear this elder, my elder, weeping. Weeping and is telling the fear that he's carrying now. Now in his 90th year. Now near on to the eve of my 70th year. He says, I know I could not fight off one of these crazy people out here now. He offers a pressing truth, a truth that has wrestled him into a corner of his tiny apartment, wrestled him almost to submission, but not yet. Sleeping has all but abandoned him. The doctor's prescriptions can only buy him a few short, restless hours. Maybe it's drinking too much CNN. Too much remembering that untasted water. Too many reawakened memories laying long dormant but not dead. Hoping and pushing to find room now. But there's precious little room for kneeling in confession, kneeling in hope, kneeling in remorse, kneeling in anger, kneeling in submission, kneeling in sorrow, sorrow so thick in the air, just a breath would be a relief. If we learn anything in our efforts to to really engage the tools and the resources that will help us all to experience mental health, a healthy mental self, personally and individually as well as collectively, no matter how young or how old we are. It has to include room and freedom for telling our story, for telling our truth, and in relationship one to another as community. If we're really about building healthy community, then somewhere in the context of that community, we have to have a commitment for staying with one another, for sitting with one another as the truth is told, as our stories are told, not avoiding or running away from one another because it gets difficult. Can we have the next slide? Keeping it real, moving forward. A truth. We can celebrate our triumphs, our victories, as well as acknowledging our wounds without shame. That kind of space is placed for us. Creating that kind of place, whether it's with gatherings like this, or inviting maybe a neighbor to just sit down with you over a cup of coffee, or just being available to listen to someone who's going through a difficult time, who needs to share. I want to close with this. I call it tender. And one of the things that sparked it was that picture. And let me just say that over the last year and a half or almost 2 years now, I'm finding for myself that a part of my own mental health comes from writing. Writing my poems, my poetry, if you will. Some of you have been looking around and you spit? Not yet, huh? Not yet. All right, any other story writers, poet, songs creators in the house? But that's what helps me. Tender. There is a sweetness that finds us, even in the swiftly come and gone moments, to season us against the bitter that too will find us. Oh, taste and see the goodness that has fashioned us. Surely we are image and kin of the Most High. Hold precious the moments, lift the generations, and when their season comes, they too will bear knowing fruit, sweet, sweet with the telling. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'd like to know a little more about the mud. Because when does that happen? How long would it be before mud settles? And isn't there some element of this clearing out before it becomes mud, so you don't have too much of a task with the settled mud? So I just like a little more clarity about that.
Well, I have to say, I'm not a devoted student of Lao Tzu, but that quote did capture my attention, because I think the intention of it is that all of us experience. I mean, there's what I know as a kid from wading through a creek, or even just in the shallow waters, at the edge of a lake. It's hard to move at all without stirring in such a way that the water that was perfectly clear gets cloudy. And so I think what he wants to get us to understand, again, that it's not at all unusual for things to get cloudy. And what was perfectly clear a few moments ago can quickly become so cloudy, or so the water is so muddy, or the issues and the dynamics that we wrestle with are so entangled. I mean, think about right now, we're in a so-called Middle East conflict, if you will. that is, where are we gonna find some clarity? There are no quick and easy solutions. So the question becomes, what can we use? What can sustain us while we are in times where things are not so clear? Where it's not so cut and dry, just black and white issues. It's not always that easy, you know? One of the challenges or the questions I would have of Lao Tzu would be, what do you consider, what happens when we consider the fact that it's often people who are living at the margins, the so-called margins, at the edge, can't always afford to wait. Sometimes waiting or having the resources to wait, or to wait out a storm, or to wait out the things that cause the confusion. Sometimes those things are costly and demand of us a kind of an urgency. Sometimes in our society, the resource of downtime, or the time to sit with a therapist or a counselor, or to just sit and reflect on our own life, our day-to-day challenges, is not afforded to us. We're pressed, gotta pick dinner, or gotta find dinner, you know? Gotta find a doctor, or can I afford a doctor? Or how do I respond when they say to me, well, you don't have insurance?
Yeah.
Sometimes at the very time, in terms of systemic systems, at the very time where we need to access to mental health resources, well, if your insurance was tied to the job that you had, but you just got laid off and that's causing another whole level of stress, then where do I turn? What's available to me now? And so the mud. Sometimes things, just about as clear as mud. But the thrashing about even more frantically doesn't help clarify. It just creates more and more confusion.
It just says it.
Now, I have to say that when you ask a preacher a question, you get a long answer. Okay, I like that. All right.
I'm gonna call on Craig in just a second, but I was just saying that.
Can we move on?
We can in a second. So Reverend Starr, I just wanted to say that I was just telling Angela, we had kind of a chaotic day today. And I just promised myself I was just gonna keep myself calm, no matter what. It's gonna be what it's gonna be, just stay calm. Part of me wanted to get in there and make it crazier. And I realized it would make it crazier. And I'm like, no, keep it calm. And then everything turned out like it turned out, and the water is clear, Jerry. Yes. Okay, folks. So now we have Angela here. Yay!
So Dr. Joni is, and thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I am excited about this evening because I think we're going to unpack a lot of things. Dr. Joni is a neurodiverse pediatrician, a national board certified health and wellness coach, and a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner with over 15 years of clinical experience exclusively supporting individuals with ADHD, autism, learning disabilities, mood disorders, and behavioral problems. As a military physician, and she is, by the way, a West Point graduate. I just want to say thank you for your service ahead of time, fellow veteran. She spent 30 years serving military soldiers and their families as a member of both the active and reserve components. She retired in 2020, only to be recalled to active service again in 2022 to support the Army recruitment missions as a service waiver authority for the USA REC through 2025. So while on active duty in a remote capacity, Dr. Joni remains committed to supporting her private coaching practice, which is Dr. Joni MD, where she works as a health consultant and empowerment strategist, assisting individuals seeking to discover underlying causes for difficulties in home, work, school, and social environments. I think you all, once you hear her story and she starts to unpack things, hopefully that will trigger some things within you that you can also take home and, you know, I guess I would say regurgitate into the community. So again, I'm excited to introduce Dr. Joni Johnson, and just in full transparency, I do identify as neurodiverse with ADHD and other issues, but despite all that, I'm working on my doctorate. So that's all I could say. So, and here's Dr. Joni to share her story. Dr. Joni.
Thank you, Angela. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Well, Angela, I hate to disappoint you because I'm not really going to share my story today. So I will tell you that I am a neurodiverse pediatrician. Angela already told you that. I have dyslexia and a visual convergence insufficiency. And my story began in 2nd grade when I realized I couldn't read. And it wasn't that I couldn't read, it's that I didn't understand anything that I read. And so I went through life compensating. And it wasn't until medical school when my compensatory mechanisms failed and I failed. And failure is a powerful thing and is actually an opportunity for growth. And it was through that experience in medical school that I recognized that being different does not mean being wrong. And from there, I've actually devoted my life to working with the neurodiverse population to get them to understand and to accept and be empowered by the superpowers that they've been given. So today, again, it's really not about me. I really want to talk about the emotional impact of ADHD. And since it is Mental Health Awareness Month, I think it's important. A lot of us don't consider ADHD to be mental health. And I really want to draw a connection, if possible, with ADHD to mental health. And so I want to start by just explaining what ADHD is. So, you know, ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And I think that if you speak to anybody, they know that. And they feel as though they know a lot about ADHD. And what's always surprising to me is that they really don't know a whole lot about ADHD. And even people who have ADHD don't know a whole lot about ADHD. And it's that awareness piece that I really want to focus on. So I want to provide you with a few fun facts about ADHD. So the first fun fact is that ADHD is not a behavior problem. And I think if you go back 10, 15 years, people thought that ADHD was a behavior problem. In fact, in the DSM, it was described that way. And the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistics, DSM. Don't worry about it. I'm drawing a blank, but it's the manual that we use to define mental health conditions. And ADHD was in there as a behavior problem. We now know that ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition. And what that means quite simply is that everyone's brain controls functionality and our ability to complete certain tasks. And people with ADHD don't necessarily go through that process. Oh, somebody put it in the chat. Okay, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So that's what DSM stands for. So thank you for that. So back to it being a neurodevelopmental condition. Basically, neurodevelopment means, in a very simplistic definition, it's our brain's ability to complete certain functions. And when you have ADHD, you don't necessarily complete functions the way people who don't have ADHD do. And so a lot of people feel as though that having ADHD means that you can't. But what I will tell you is that having ADHD doesn't mean that you're wrong. And I mentioned that before. But ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition. And what that means is you're born with it. It's a part of who you are. ADHD is not something that you can catch from somebody else. You don't get it from a vaccine. It's not something that develops later in life. It's just kind of a part of you. Most people believe that ADHD is something that presents in childhood. And I will tell you, in many cases, it does, but it doesn't stop there. Because ADHD is something that you're born with, it's also something that you're going to die with. There is no cure for ADHD. So what happens is, as a child, because you don't know you have it, oftentimes you don't do what other people do. And it's at that time when you're not performing like other people that we oftentimes, as parents, will get you into a system, take you to your doctor, so that you can be diagnosed, as we call it. But sometimes, because ADHD is something that you're born with, we also recognize that it's genetic. It runs in families. And so what happens to some children who have ADHD is that their parents may have had ADHD. Oftentimes they're diagnosed, sometimes they're undiagnosed. But what has happened is that they've learned to compensate. And so in learning certain strategies as a parent, when they're raising their children using these strategies and providing certain accommodations. So the child who was born with ADHD and didn't know that they had ADHD, oftentimes they learn to compensate, much like I did, and they may make it through elementary school, middle school, high school, maybe even college, before they hit that wall and start to struggle. So this is how adults who were never diagnosed with ADHD as a kid can start to have difficulty and start to have problems. There's a statistic that I want you to pay attention to, and that is 65%. Roughly 65% of kids who had ADHD symptoms will go on to be adults also with those ADHD symptoms. So there are a lot of adults out there with ADHD. Some knew they had it as a child and didn't quite learn how to manage it, and others didn't present until they were an adult. Another number I want you to remember is 75 to 90%. That's the number of individuals who will have ADHD if they have a family member with ADHD. And that's important. And I say that because, again, if you have ADHD, you were born with it, but it doesn't always present to the point where you actually know that you have ADHD. But if you're struggling and you have a family member that's struggling, there's a 75 to 90% chance that you too may have ADHD because you're related to somebody who has ADHD. Now, there's another fun fact that I'll share with you before we move on, and that's what I call my 80-20 rule. Now, full disclosure, the statistics aren't quite 80-20. They're kind of 66-33. But 80-20 is kind of sexy. It's something you kind of will remember. So I took a little license in changing the numbers slightly to prove a point. And the point of the 80-20 rule is this. 20% of people who have ADHD just have ADHD. That's it. That's all that they've got going on. It's just ADHD. But 80% of people with ADHD have ADHD and something else. So you may want to know, well, what's that something else? Well, it could be another neurodevelopmental condition, like a learning difference. They can have obsessive compulsive disorder. They can have oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder. They can have autism or even something like anxiety and depression. And so the point I'm trying to make here with this 80-20 rule is, if you have ADHD, whether you're an adult or a child, and you're managing your ADHD, or at least you feel like you're managing your ADHD, but you're still struggling, things aren't getting any better. Maybe they've gotten a little better, but you're still not achieving what you want to achieve. I would charge you to look for something else. And I even think it works the other way. So if you have, let's say, anxiety or depression, and you're treating that anxiety and depression, you're on medicine maybe, or you're going to therapy, but you still feel like something isn't quite hitting, something's not quite right. I would say to you, think about ADHD, particularly if you have a family member or a child who has ADHD, think about it. Because there is this connection, and this is how ADHD is mental health. So the next question you may think, because I'm speaking to a room of adults, is, well, if I'm an adult and you're telling me I might have ADHD, how is it going to present? Like, how would it show up? Well, here's the thing. ADHD, if you Google it, they're going to give you a lot of characteristics that oftentimes you'll see in kids. ADHD looks very different in kids and in adults. In fact, when most of us think about ADHD, as I said before, we don't even think about it as something that impacts adults. A lot of people believe that ADHD is something that occurs in childhood, it impacts a child's learning, and then somehow, miraculously, it kind of goes away. But it doesn't. It just transforms a little bit. So when we think about ADHD in kids, we might be thinking about that hyperactive kid who's, running around like that Energizer bunny, can't sit still, busy, always into things, can't get them to sit down. Well, that doesn't happen with adults, but adults can be hyperactive. It just shows up differently. And in fact, we've even recognized that men with ADHD look very different than women with ADHD. Men with ADHD tend to be more hyperactive, but it oftentimes shows up as impulsivity and risk-taking behaviors. Whereas women, adults with ADHD, they tend to be more inattentive, and it can show up looking more like a mood disorder, like anxiety or depression. So even though it looks different, it still can have a similar impact. I kind of want to go through with you just briefly, because I don't want to take too much of your time. I just want to give you like a little overview and some things to think about. But how ADHD can look like anxiety or depression. So imagine, if you have ADHD, again, you were born with it. You don't know that you have ADHD. And so you're going through life and you know that you're very capable. You've got high self-esteem and high self-confidence because you're an achiever. And all of a sudden, you stop achieving. You're still working hard, but you're not getting the results that you were expected to get. Now, again, you don't know that you have ADHD. Maybe your brother or your sister has ADHD, but that's not me. I don't look like them. So I don't know what's going on. And I continue to try, and I continue to not be successful. And all of a sudden, I start to fear trying because I don't want to fail. And then I start questioning my confidence. And then all of a sudden, my high self-esteem starts to lower and lower. And then maybe I don't feel good about myself at all. So what's happening here is I've gone from a very positive, successful individual that is high achieving, and I've hit that wall that we talked about earlier, where all of a sudden things just aren't happening. It's not connecting for me. And I develop some anxiety, possibly that fear of even putting myself out there. And then maybe I start feeling down and bad and thinking I'm less than because I can't achieve the way somebody else is achieving. Well, that's anxiety and that's depression. And maybe if you go to the doctor, that's what they tell you you have. but it came from ADHD. It came from not understanding that I'm not able to focus and I'm not able to sustain attention in this particular situation or in that situation, or I can't meet the deadlines that I used to be able to meet, or this particular task has too many pieces and parts and I just can't even get started. And maybe I can get started, but I just don't even know how I can finish. Those could be signs of ADHD that I don't even recognize, but the consequence is that emotionally I'm impacted by it. So ADHD is one of those things that even as an adult, we want to recognize and we want to treat because there are significant consequences of an untreated ADHD. Now, the first one I've already gone into, it can cause some emotional instability, right? But it can also have an impact at your job. You know, if you can't attain the task or accomplish the task, your productivity may go down. Maybe you're always late to work. Maybe you're missing deadlines. An untreated ADHD can actually lead to a job loss. Untreated ADHD can impact relationships. Think about marital stress. You know, we talked about the impulsivity, the risk-taking behaviors. ADHD can lead to infidelity. It can lead to substance abuse. It can lead to, in a relationship, not handling the businesses of that household, paying your bills on time, or even being available to care for your kids the way that they need to be cared for. So ADHD is one of those things that you don't want to ignore it. I know a lot of people will say, well, I think I might have ADHD, jokingly. But the reality is that if you think you have it, you want to find out if you have it. Because importantly, what you should know is that ADHD can be treated. And if ADHD is treated, ADHD can in fact be your superpower. So your question may be, well, how do we treat ADHD as an adult? Well, it's a little different than how we treat ADHD as a child, but the overall concept is the same. The first thing that you need to do is to recognize that you have characteristics that are consistent with ADHD. Next, you have to recognize if that's having any kind of impact on you emotionally or psychologically. Then you need to come up with some strategies to deal with those areas where you may be impacted, where those executive functioning skills are just not functioning the way they're supposed to. And then lastly, you may want to consider medication. There are wonderful medications to treat ADHD, but there's this overall fear about these medications. And I want to relieve that stigma slightly. Think about when you have a headache. There are different ways to treat that headache. First, you have to realize that you got a headache, right? Sometimes we're thinking, oh, maybe I need to eat, maybe it's just stress. But okay, I've identified I've got a headache. Then we think about, well, okay, what are some strategies I can use for this headache? Well, like I said, you could eat, maybe take a nap. Maybe it's not that bad and you just deal with it. Or maybe that headache is so significant that you need to go to the medicine cabinet and pull out the Tylenol or the Motrin. ADHD is the same way. Medication is a tool to treat ADHD. It's not a fix, and it's not something that you necessarily have to use every single day. Some people elect to use medication every day. In kids, we typically use medication every day. But as an adult who really recognizes how ADHD impacts you, you have the judgment to use and determine when you need medicine and when you don't. But medicine can be that tool that can allow you to use ADHD to your advantage. I want to leave you with this thought. And it's really not a thought, but I just want you to think about it this way. What I tell my children, my patients, who I diagnose with ADHD, I tell them to think about what it is that they want to do in life. who do they want to be? What profession do they want to go into? If you want to be in IT, let's say, I'll tell them, go to Google and look up the CEOs of an IT company that you're familiar with and see if they have ADHD. What you will find is that the people that are at the top of their game have ADHD. And I'm talking about people like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Simone Biles. I could keep naming them, but I won't. The point is, ADHD is something that allows us to be great and to be successful, not in spite of ADHD, but because of ADHD. So if you're struggling, if you're not sure what is going on, but you're just not accomplishing those things that you know in your heart of hearts that you can accomplish, and particularly if you have a family member who has ADHD, don't sleep on it. Go find out if that's you. And if it is, do something about it. Because again, ADHD may in fact be your superpower. And that's all I've got to say about it. I hope I've brought some awareness to you as to what ADHD is really about. Maybe relieve some of the stigma or concerns that you have about it. And I'm willing to answer any questions that you may have going forward. Thank you for your time.
That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joni. Thank you so much. Oh, it's been great. So I guess I might have a little ADHD. Just a little. You know, wait, because guess what? We're not gonna do Q&A right now, because we're gonna take a few minutes. This poor man has had a bad day too, just like I did. But he calmed himself all the way down and he made it over here to us. And I want to tell you a little bit about him, because he's gonna say a few words and then, you know, we can always bring him back, but he's gotta say something. He drove all the way over here. James Coomes is a licensed clinical social worker with the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health and currently serves as the service area chief for the Antelope Valley SPA 1. He has been actively involved in crisis prevention, intervention, and postvention for over 20 years. In addition to his work in his current assignment, James is a member of the department's Anti-Racism, Diversity and Inclusion Staff Advisory Council. That's our stuff, right? Outside of the office, James is serving as the chair of the Burbank Police Commission. That's our stuff too. Is the current president of the Board of Trustees at Neighborhood Unitarian Universalist Church in Pasadena, among other community volunteer activities. And he's our guy. With all of that, he's us. He's family. So James, come on.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, I apologize. Thank you. I apologize for running late. Part of it was a little bit of self-care, and I'll explain that in a moment. So I don't do a whole lot, as much as I probably should for self-care. So I actually had a softball game today, and we made it to the championship game and we lost. But then something else came up as well, and that was, I thought everything was working out fine. I actually had a friend who had an emergency, literally a trailer that blew off the back of an RV, and it was a mess. It's all worked out, and I do apologize for being here late. I wanted to share with you a little bit of information about the LA County Department of Mental Health. I realized I use those owls sometimes as well. So I've been working with LA County Department of Mental Health for about 25 years or so. And what we do is we provide services to folks, two different groups. Folks who are experiencing severe and persistent mental health issues. And then we also do a lot of community outreach. Has anybody heard on the news or on the radio something about Take Action LA and a series of events that are happening all over the county this month? Okay, I'll give you some additional information on it as well. So May is Mental Health Month. We've been celebrating May is Mental Health Month since 1949, and Mental Health America They have a Los Angeles chapter here, but Mental Health America on the East Coast actually established it 76 years ago. And so one of the things that we know is that we all are either experienced or we are touched by issues related to mental health. It might be a loved one, it might be a family member or community member. And so 1 in 4 people experiences a major mental health issue at some point in their life. The state of California has something called, they require something called the local mental health plan. And what this is every county in the state is required to be able to provide public mental health services. And that's the system that I work in. We serve about 200, LA County's got about 10 million people here. We serve about 250,000 people annually. And the folks that we serve there's a certain criteria that they need for the services that we provide. And the first, there has to be what's called an included diagnosis. And ADHD is one of those included diagnoses. The second item is what we would refer to as a functional impairment. So the doctor that just spoke before I did was talking about ADHD a lot of folks live with ADHD, and then sometimes ADHD can cause challenges in relationships or in work or in maintaining things that we need to kind of get along day to day, school, be a number of different spaces. And so there has to be that functional impairment. And then the third criteria is something that we have to be able to do about it. So if somebody meets those criteria, and there's some financial screening as well, but if they meet that criteria, that's the type of person. It could be ADHD, it could be schizophrenia, it could be bipolar disorder, it could be major depression. There's a wide range of diagnoses in that DSM manual, and that's what we treat. Some people wonder why they can't receive services through the county, and sometimes it's because people have private insurance. So if somebody has private insurance, they can come to the county, but they may have to pay out of pocket because we're trying to serve folks that are often referred to as the unserved, the underserved, and the inappropriately served. And again, it's a pretty large range of folks, about 250,000 people that we serve. I was asked to bring some brochures, but I got something actually a little bit better than that. And I want to give you a little bit of information. You can pull out your phone if you want to do this as well. I want to give you 2 websites. The first website, pretty straightforward. It is DMH for Department of Mental Health, dmh.lacounty.gov. And that is one of the front doors that's used to be able to access mental health services. And there's a bunch of information there. I'm not going to go into all the details of it right now. The other one that I want you all to be aware of, and these are the events that I was talking about, it's called takeactionla.com. Takeactionla.com. And I just had an event in my service area yesterday, and there was an event that took place in service area 2 in Pacoima today. And there are events taking place throughout the county throughout the month of May. And these are resource fairs kind of on steroids. These are resource fairs where we're actually engaging people in services and getting people connected to what they may need in the moment. The event that we had actually included an agency from Santa Monica that specializes in something called sound baths. I'd never heard of it before. Has anybody here ever heard of a sound bath before? Yeah. Great. I've never heard of them before.
Oh, yeah, you should do it.
They're pretty amazing. They're pretty amazing. And how?
BATH.
Which one?
It's SOUND
Sound bath. Sound bath.
Yeah.
BATH.
BATH. Yeah. And so what?
You can look it up on YouTube.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And so what they did was, and so these events, these Take Action LA events that are taking place around the county, they had, amongst other groups, there was a group that does sound baths. And what they do is you talk to this computer basically, and it reads your voice and your tone, and then it creates tones that provide you feedback that you listen to in the sound bath, whether you're preparing to play sports, or if you need to relax or go to sleep, or if you're feeling depressed, or if you're feeling agitated. So what I'm getting at is that these Take Action LA events are sharing a lot of these resources with the community. So I know that there will be an event that's coming to Service Area 5, which is where we're located right now, and that should be coming up sometime this month. I don't have the date off the top of my head, but if you beat me to it and you go to takeactionla.com, you will hopefully be able to connect with that. I want to shift gears a little bit. So I talked a little about what our department does. Oh, one more number I want to give. To access our services, the front door to access our services is you can call 988. How many people have heard about the number 988? Some people may have seen that on the buses or something like that. It's actually a nationwide number now, calling 988. D.D. Hirsch Mental Health, which is located in Culver City, and they've also got a place in Century City. They are actually the local number that if you were to call the suicide prevention hotline, you'd get connected with Dee Hirsch. 988 is now supporting that, so the suicide prevention hotline is still available, but 988 will help get you connected with that. It'll get you connected with a number of different resources, and it can be anything from looking for referrals for mental health services to if you're concerned about a loved one, or if you or a loved one is thinking about suicide, that's the number that you can call, and we'll be able to get a wide range of services and resources, not just through the Department of Mental Health, but through our network of hundreds of agencies and organizations that we work with as well. Okay, so I want to make sure you've got all of that information. Part of the reason I was asked to come speak tonight was to specifically talk about, as a Black man, how do I take care of my mental health and in these times, in these challenging times. So ever since George Floyd was murdered, there was like a switch that was flipped, and I've always been Black. I've always lived walking in this world as a Black man. Something happened in 2020 that allowed me to find my voice and allowed a lot of people to find our voices. So that's when we started seeing protests. People are taking to the streets. There's more resources that are out there. There's more open discussion about what it means to experience race in America and how that has an impact on us. So one of the things that happened within the Department of Mental Health is I got involved in something called the ARDI, the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Staff Advisory Council. There was a group of about 70 staff that came together and felt that we needed to do something differently. So this started in the fall of 2020. And what we did was we went through, if we're going to make, and this happened, by the way, in a lot of different institutions across the country, a lot of school systems, government institutions were involved in this, hospital systems got involved in this. Some of the places that you may have worked or be involved in may have gotten involved in this as well, where there started to be more conversation and dialogue around how do we make our system genuinely anti-racist. So within the Department of Mental Health, this group of staff identified a list of 102 things that we need to change within our system if we're truly going to transform the work that we do. And I'm going to give you just one example. For a number of years, I ran a crisis mental health center in Sylmar, and we would receive folks in all sorts of different states. We were there to try to create a safe space for people to come into. And I had a situation where a parent was bringing her adult child, about 30 years old, drove a number of miles, probably 50 miles plus, to come to our location because they were in crisis. And the problem was her son was experiencing psychosis. Her son refused to talk to anybody. We needed to connect her son with a psychiatrist. Her son refused to talk to anybody unless it was a Black male psychiatrist, okay? There's only a few Black male psychiatrists within the Department of Mental Health right now. In order to become a psychiatrist, you have to finish your bachelor's degree, and then you have to go to medical school, and then you have to go to a residency program, and then you gotta get hired by an agency to deliver those services, okay? And so we have a limited number of Black male psychiatrists within the Department of Health. And this is, by the way, I want to emphasize, this is just one example I'm giving of how we're trying to transform our systems. So we knew that this family was looking for specific services, specific resource. We didn't have it available in my location. I called around the department. We didn't have that immediately available. So this led to taking a deeper look at some of the issues that we experience within our institutions. We realized that there's a limited number of Black male psychiatrists within the Department of Mental Health. And the ones that we have there are overwhelmed with the number of folks that they're working with, okay? So in order to get more Black male psychiatrists, we have to look at medical residency programs. And this is where they do the training. So we've got to get people to apply for and choose to and get into medical residency programs to focus on psychiatry, specifically in public mental health for us. But there's a limited number of Black male residents that are in these programs. The good news is that Charles Drew University is a program that's helping address this issue, but there's still a much greater demand than the resources that are available right now. So in order to get Black men into that residency program, we've got to go back to undergraduate programs and get Black men to consider medical school. Let me back up. We have to get them out of medical school to want to go into psychiatry. There's a step that I missed in there. So the residency program, there's medical school. So we've got to get more Black men in medical school. But in order to get more Black men in medical school, we've got to step back to undergraduate programs to recruit, to get more Black men to go into the undergraduate programs, to be able to go on to medical school, to be able to go on to the residency. You with me so far? Okay, but how many Black men are driven to focus? There are a number, but do we have large numbers of Black men specifically that are going into undergraduate programs with a focus on medical school, with a focus on residency, with a focus on working in the public mental health system? Okay, so one of those 102 things that we realized is that we need to go all the way back to high schools to recruit, and it's not just Black men, but to recruit people to work in these systems that are reflective of the communities that we serve.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what the community is, but and it doesn't mean that somebody who is of a different race, ethnicity, or culture cannot serve another community. But sometimes it makes it a little bit harder. And I think that's something that we've experienced. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to find ways to change in our system, how we can be more equipped to meet the needs of the community. Make sense?
Great.
And so part of my job and part of my role, it's personal and it's professional. It's to try to help drive these systems to meet the needs of the communities that we serve. Where I currently work right now in the Antelope Valley, it is, the demographics have changed out there over the last 20 years. There's about a little over 500,000 people that live out there. And there are it's about 25% Black or African American or African diaspora. It's about 47% Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, and then the rest is predominantly white. What part of our job is in these systems is to help our workforce, try to help our workforce reflect the communities that we're serving, but also make sure that our workforce has the cultural competence to meet the needs of the communities that we're serving. And the only way we can do that is if we openly talk about this stuff. That's the tricky part, and that's the part that I've really been leaning into, especially in the last 5 years or so. But it's a passion, it's a calling. This is part of what we do. So again, before I leave with you, I want to make sure that you've got the website for dmh.lacounty.gov, which is the LA County Department of Mental Health. I want to make sure that you've got the website for takeactionla.com. And then I also want to make sure that you've got the number 988. And that could be used in a crisis.
Yeah, I think Louise has put that in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for adding that. I appreciate that. With that, I'm gonna turn it back because I know that this meeting generally wraps up, I believe, around 8 o'clock. And maybe we can arrange for me to come back another day to talk about other stuff. But I wanted to turn it back over to our hosts, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right, I know we got questions. Can you hang around here for a few questions?
Sure.
Okay. So Louise has put all of that great information, referrals, resources in the chat, and I know you guys have written it down. If you haven't, I have it on my phone, so I can let you know what that is. And so now is a good time. Q&A. Take it away. We know you've been waiting. Take it away.
It's interesting. I in seeing the picture with the Ku Klux Klan, that Ku Klux Klan picture.
So this was with Reverend Starr? Okay.
A lot of people don't understand or know what the purpose of forming the Ku Klux Klan was, but the picture explains it to one degree. And I guess my question is there anything, because, you know, when you look at the Ku Klux Klan, it's not just, you know, the folks who gather, you know, at night to burn a cross. Policemen of Ku Klux Klan, judges of Ku Klux Klan, senators and congressmen are Ku Klux Klan members. And so I'm wondering if there is indeed I guess you could say, course of study that looks at the psychology and the psychiatry of racism that we can look at and more or less internalize, so that we can understand not just the power behind the institutions, behind the individuals that run it.
Oh, very good, Craig. any of y'all,
On that still?
any of y'all can, yeah, they're still there. Any of y'all, including you, Joni, can, I guess, jump in? Wanna
So
take a stab?
yes, and it's not just the psychology of racism. I'm a little biased. When I was an undergrad, I studied sociology. And there's a professor that I had by the name of Melvin Oliver, who was working for the Center for the Study of Urban Poverty. And I've been in touch with him periodically. I haven't seen him for years. And I was watching, I mentioned, or it was mentioned that I worked as part of the police commission in Burbank.
He's off the floor.
Well, no, he was off the books and everything. But what ended up happening was I was required to take a class by being a member of the police commission. And by the, it's the League of, I think it was the League of Cities, League of Cities or something like that. There's some organization it's a civic group that's nationwide. And we were required to take a training through them. And in the training, we're watching a PBS video and we're talking about the history of systemic racism in our legislation in the United States.
Wow.
And who pops up in the video as a subject matter expert, Professor Melvin Oliver. And so what I'm getting at is that there's so many more resources that are out there now that weren't before. I got a chance, hopefully this will become public and maybe some of you have seen it because my understanding is that there was a screening in Santa Monica. Do folks know about the reparations commission that's working in the
Yes.
city?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they've
Oh, yeah.
They've been here. Did they show a video?
No.
No.
We gotta watch for this.
Okay.
Because I got a chance to see a screening of the video that commission has commissioned.
Oh,
That-
okay.
there's a lot of history that's just coming out now, so it's not just the Ku Klux Klan, we're talking about a history of systemic discrimination.
Oh, yeah.
We need to learn more about. One of the things that I did not realize is we always talk about how California is a free state. And it turns out that slavery was active as part of establishing California with the gold rush. And so one of the things that's in this video that folks will see is that there's actually a cemetery outside of Denver, Colorado, where when people were moving out to California as part of the gold rush, and they were bringing slaves with them, and if the slaves didn't survive the trip, they were buried in this cemetery in Denver on their way out to California. There's a lot of history, especially in the last 10 years.
The whole idea of sundown town.
You got it. Which
Change
Burbank,
California.
you got it. In Burbank and Glendale have recently done resolutions around sundown towns. And so what's happening in Santa Monica? So it's not just the psychology of racism. I make the argument it's systems understanding the sociology of racism and being willing to have a conversation, like what we're doing in the Department of Mental Health, that the system hadn't necessarily been able to do previously. And the more we have the opportunity to talk about it, not to just talk about it and say it's a problem, but to work through solutions and help open up minds and hearts. That's the hard work right there.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
okay, I want to be mindful of Dr. Joni because she is calling in from the East Coast. So if anyone had a question for her, could you let us know now and then she's gonna go. So.
And then there was this surprise. Am I reading that wrong? In other words, what was it like? You said you didn't, about reading. How did you make it all the way up to the medical school for that to be the first surprise? Unless I heard it wrong.
No, you didn't hear it wrong. And I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question. My camera froze, but I think you were asking, how did I make it all the way to medical school without realizing that I had an issue? It's because my parents helped me to compensate. I mean, that's just the bottom line. So in second grade, I couldn't read, and I tell everybody that's when I put my first mask on, because I didn't want anybody to know that I didn't understand what was going on. And my parents were educators. So I would go to school and, sit there and I guess learn in school. And then I would come home and I'd either use Cliff Notes or my parents would reteach me. I remember I would write my, essays or whatever I had to do for school, and I would leave it on the dining room table. And then when I would wake up the next morning, my mother had taken whatever and grammar checked it and checked all the spelling and retyped it. And I would turn it in. So I guess you could say I was a high achiever, and I used every mechanism possible to succeed. And so in elementary school up through high school, I had straight A's. And so even though I would ask for help, they always felt that somebody needed more help than I did. There was somebody who needed it more than I did, so I never got any help. When I got to West Point, well, that was interesting because I'm an auditory learner. And so I would put together study groups, and I would say, oh, let's get together and let's talk about the book. Knowing I had not read a single page of the book, but I would go and I would just listen, and I would put in little comments here and there, but I would learn what the concepts of the book were based on the conversations. And then when I got to medical school, that didn't work anymore because nobody had time for study groups and nobody had time to help me figure things out. And what really got me in medical school was I have a visual convergence insufficiency. And so I failed anatomy and histology, which are very visual classes. So for example, in anatomy, we would work on cadaver bodies. But then when it came time to take the test, like I would look at the heart and I would identify associations so that I could figure out what the vessels were of the heart. But when we went to take the test, what they would do is take the heart out of the body, flip it over, turn it upside down, and put it on a leg and say, what vessel is this? And for me, now you've destroyed all of my associations. And so I couldn't do it. I couldn't figure it out. And so I went to Albert Einstein College of Medicine. And after my first year, I was on an Army scholarship, and I went to the, I don't know, student services. And I said to them, hey, I know you're about to kick me out and I'm going to have to go back to the Army. What is the process? And they said, if the process is, if you made it in, we're going to make sure you make it out. And they were the ones that sent me and had me tested. And then I went through a program, they call it deceleration. So instead of taking 4 years, it took me 5 years. I was a single parent at that point, and they said, we don't want you studying on the weekends. They assigned me a tutor, and they assigned me a therapist, because at that point I had major depression because, I had failed. So that's how I made it through.
Wonderful.
I'm a big advocate for medication. So let me say that first and foremost. But I know that there are a lot of people that are uncomfortable with medication, and I respect that. I think from my perspective, it's really important to understand what your challenge is. And what I mean by that, it's important to really take the time to recognize what is going on. And I guess the best way I can explain this is to give you an example. My daughter has ADHD. She's a lawyer, and she cannot get started on anything. And lawyers got a lot of work to do when they're working on a case. And she'll lay around on the couch and be on social media, and I'll say, don't you have stuff to do? No, I don't have anything to do, because her ADHD does not allow her to see future planning. She can't see tasks that have to be done in the future, particularly if there's no deadline. So if she's just told she has to have a case prepared by, June 1st and it's May 1st, she can't process all of the different steps that go into having that case prepared. And so she waits until the last minute, and then now she stresses out, she's freaking out, she's, totally overwhelmed. But again, ADHD is a superpower, and she is one that can pull it out in the end. So I use her as an example because it's important to recognize what you're doing. And so we've spent a lot of time talking, and what she's doing is she can't see the future. So what she needs to do is chunk her assignments. She needs to, when she's given a case, she needs to, at that time, break down all of the steps for that case. And then she needs real deadlines. So she needs to have on her calendar, the first step needs to be done tomorrow. The second step needs to be done next Tuesday, or whatever the case may be. But before she realized that this was her issue, she couldn't attack it. She couldn't strategize. So if you're not going to use medicine, And I'll tell you a little bit about medicine, but you have to be able to first recognize all of the specific areas where you're struggling, how that impacts you. And then that's what enables you to then strategize. And I would say this is probably something that you can't do by yourself. Because if you could do it by yourself, you would have done it. So you probably need someone, whether that's a coach, a therapist, a friend, somebody to help you see where you're struggling, all of those pieces of the puzzle that you just can't see, and then you can strategize. Now, what do medications do? Medications give you sight. And so for kids, for example, when they lose focus, they don't know that they've lost focus. And so when we try to give them strategies, they can't maintain focus long enough to work out the strategies, to practice the strategies long enough for them to be rote, right? So when I say the medicines give you sight, the medicines allow you to sometimes see where you're struggling, and then to allow you to actually work through the strategy. And then once the strategy becomes a habit, then you don't need the medicine anymore. So the medicine has a role, and there's really should be no fear over the medicine, because what the medicine is doing is replacing a chemical in your brain that you just can't stimulate. And that medicine allows that chemical to be stimulated so that the frontal lobe can actually do the things that it's intended to do.
That's the medicine.
Asking for a friend.
That's me. Yeah, just asking for a friend, Dr. Joni. What's the medicine?
What's the medicine?
I thought I was stupid. Yeah.
There's a whole lot of different medicines now. I mean, every medicine doesn't work for every person.
Girl, don't worry, I'll call you. Okay.
Call me.
I need help.
A question that's just a personal question, and I'm sure for a lot of people, I'd like to ask both of you, where does grief fit in with mental health?
Yeah.
I mean, how does that either exacerbate or just on its own mess things up in long ways? The loss of a wife or husband or mother or father or son or a daughter. So I'm just wondering, is that classified in any way? Are there ways that mental health people are classifying that as some mental health issue?
So, Dr. Joni, did you want to start with that?
Well, yeah, I mean, and again, I'm a pediatrician. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I will tell you that grief is a mood disorder. It is a mental health disorder. And just like any mental health disorder, grief can throw you off. Grief can make it so that you cannot function. And I think that's well recognized. It can be temporary, or it could last for years. And just like any other mental health condition, if you're grieving, you need help to get through that process. There are stages of grief, and I'm not going to get into all the different stages of grief, but when you recognize that you're grieving, that you're not able to really do the things that you know you should be doing or would even like to be doing, you've got to reach out, and you've got to get somebody to help you move through those stages of grief so that you can function.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, for asking that question.
Well, thank you.
I think this workshop is really for me.
So
Craig, Craig, do you have a question?
Did you have a Dr. Joni, or can we go ahead and excuse her? Yeah, it's 11:15 where she's at.
If she can answer it,
Okay.
I mean, it's
Okay, I'll take a question.
Okay.
Are there any, I guess you could say, studies specifically around ADHD that address improper or proper diet as the cause for this stuff?
Interesting.
So let's see, did I understand? Are there any studies that look at ADHD and diet? Is that?
Yeah. Is there a correlation between improper diet and ADHD.
So,
And the reason I ask that is because that's the one, that is, teaching. But I'm looking at, most mental health issues and what that relationship is to diet.
so I will tell you, I cannot speak to any specific studies that look at diet as a cause or an exacerbation of ADHD. However, a lot of people have believed that sugar, particularly in kids, can make ADHD worse. I have not seen where that has been proven. It kind of would make sense, but I don't know that I'm not familiar with where that has been proven through, evidence-based medicine. So, I mean, I say that to say you can go on Google and find an article that will say excess sugar can lead to ADHD or exacerbate ADHD. But as far as evidence-based medicine and studies, I'm not familiar with any that have drawn any connection between specific foods and exacerbation of ADHD.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Joni. I'll be calling her up. I'm gonna go back and play this video. It's on recorded. When it goes to YouTube, I also send it to my kids, my daughter, for my grandkids. You've been great. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, if you need me, Angela knows how to reach me. But thank you for the opportunity. Sorry I have to drop off, but I got to get up early in the morning. All right.
And she does have a website. You want to give them your website?
Oh, it's www.drjonimd, DRJONIMD.com.
And she's on Instagram.
I'm on Instagram, Dr. Joni MD. So it's at Dr. Joni MD on Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn.
And you're on the East Coast.
I'm on the East Coast, right? But in my coaching practice, we do it via Zoom. So if you need me, I can help you no matter where you're at.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Louise, can you put that in the chat for us? For the people online?
Or I can. That's fine.
It's done.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We gotta wrap it up, guys, but if we got two more questions, that's great. Did you have a question? Okay, then.
I just been having some problems with my ADHD. And I'm a local in this community. I'm not being here for a couple of years now. I used to, I'm a medical assistant. And just right now I've been dealing with grief. I just lost my dad with COVID-19.
Yeah.
I just been kind of feeling systematically oppressed by the county, Department of Mental Health. I'm kind of giving me a lot of anxiety just to talk about it right now. Because this guy right here, Coomes, not to put him on the spot like that, man, but
is this personal, a personal situation that you have?
I've been a victim of involuntary commitments.
Okay.
I'm just trying to get them deported.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm used to the racial community.
Yeah.
I met you part years ago.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming back.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I've been jumped by nurses and people from the county that are staff. They said I'm trying to kill myself.
Okay.
I'm just trying to get some help, so I'm trying to say is I'm out of my medication. And I don't have insurance. So I've been directed to the access, all the numbers and stuff that they provided. And I can't get meds. They won't give me meds. They won't even let me go to the urgent care. Exodus urgent care in Culver City. Or to where he used to work at. I used to live in the service area too. And he was the director at the urgent care.
Okay.
I don't know if it's a Woody Lynch thing. I don't know how you guys see me. Like the white man or my mom was African American.
We'll see you.
Yeah.
It's just people that put that lied on me was black people. You know what I mean? I just my mom she used to call me a white boy and all types of shit. It's my peers and stuff like that. You know, I did my own research on it, like the Whitney Lynch
Right.
thing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it's because of that, or like, why am I being, you know, with the lady, you know, the doctor say, you know, you have certain conditions, certain
Yeah.
side effects, so it's like,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get some help, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we love.
Is there a way that?
What's your name?
My name's Ash.
Ash.
Okay.
I told me, you know, one of the colleagues at the Department of Mental Health is Latina Jackson. They put me in jail. Like they made me go to jail. Like they set out threatening them.
Oh, wow.
We're glad you came.
Yeah.
Glad you, broke bread with us, Reverend Starr.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, guys, this is what we do. We finna wrap it up. We don't
Okay.
have any more questions, right? Hey, y'all. Yeah, they won't kick us out the park. We gotta go.
And they're gonna talk to Ash on the side, so,
Yeah, Ash,
you know,
yeah.
make sure he's taken care of.
So what we do is we all stand up in a circle and we have a little chant that we do for the people at City Hall and all over Santa Monica. So let's go. Come on, y'all. Come on. Yeah. Come on. All right. Circle. Circle. So we do this chant 3 times. So we start low, and then we get louder and louder. Remember? Yeah. You standing next to Craig. We gonna teach you this today. Okay.
I won't do
You won't do that. Don't do the baby like that. Don't do the baby like that.
I'll wait.
Okay, but she keep coming back. So maybe it's okay. So this is how we do this. We start with a chant from Asada Shakur, and it goes like this. It is our duty to fight for freedom.
It is our duty to fight for freedom.
And everyone unmute.
Oh, everybody, Louise, everybody unmute. Okay. Okay, let's start again. It is our duty to fight for freedom.
It is our duty to fight for freedom.
It is our duty to win. We must love and protect one another.
Protect one another.
But our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
Ready? It is our duty to fight for freedom.
It is our duty to fight for freedom.
We must love and protect one another.
We must love and protect one
We have
another.
nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
Here we go, guys. All the way to City Hall. It is our duty to fight for freedom.
It is our duty to fight for freedom.
It is our duty to win. It is our duty
A duty to win.
love and protect. You can help me out, Craig. We must love and protect one another.
Love and protect one another.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We got nothing to lose but our chains.
Ashe.
Ashe.
I love you guys. Keep coming back. Can I work? Did we work it?
Is that okay if I make an announcement?
Sure.
Okay.
Welcome to our new chairperson.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Come on. Quick, because we gotta go.
There's an architectural review board meeting. I know it's short notice, tomorrow, Monday at City Hall at 7 p.m. I've been going to housing commission meetings. And the thing is, they want to build an 8-story monstrosity at 21st and Wilshire. But what the developers are doing is finding a loophole around denying affordable housing for those units. That's right. But see, we went to an architectural review board meeting at Santa Monica Library, and we put a temporary stop to that plan.
Okay.
Because I don't know if you guys know, there's this thing called the Catherine and all these huge ugly monstrosities.
Hearing all I have.
They're completely empty.
Yeah.
There's no
yeah.
leasing office, they wanna all make them all 400 square foot studios, like sardine cans. And then charge, you know,
Okay.
400.
So tomorrow night, 6 o'clock,
I'm sure
City Hall,
Monday, May 6th, 7 PM.
7 PM, City Hall.
City Hall, second floor,
Because
because,
from Nancy, okay.
just
All right.
because
You're gonna
you had talks about affordable housing
Yeah.
before COVID,
Yeah.
and they don't want us.
We have a housing committee that meets. And we want to invite you all to come
Yeah,
and talk about
Because
it.
if I could keep
Yeah.
saying,
Yeah.
because we put a stop to that
Yeah.
monstrosity.
We've gotta go. We gotta go. Thank you.
She's
Thank
standing
you.
at the door.
All right. Thanks so much. You know.
Where's,
You know.
so you want to go to his.